the things I often say to people when we're talking about having regular, meaningful conversations, giving people feedback, feels like common sense. It's not performance management, it's management, right? So why do we think it's so hard for many companies to do? Why are people so struggling to move to this kind of approach when it does seem like common sense?
There's a little bit, I think, of past bad habits that are still, I guess, part of the delivery mechanism for a manager, which is that they've got so many other priorities, they'll fit it in and they have such good intent, but the first thing they'll cancel is perhaps a check-in with a member of the team when they've got to prepare a paper for the board the next day. So some of it, I think, is in the overloading of managers with tasks and less people responsibility. So I think systematically we need to change that.
Freeing up time to enable them to be good people managers.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
It's like we've lost the people bit of it, and they are the sort of, I suppose, the figurehead of delivering a certain thing, and people just happen to be part of that equation. It's like,
do you think a lot of that was from the history of devolving to the line? So there was IT responsibility, procurement, all went to the manager, and then we're asking you to be a really good coach as well.
Exactly that. And I think, if we look at the advent of, digital technology in the workplace, even through the 80s and 90s, people would then have to do their own diaries, email, travel responsibilities and so on. And suddenly their task list got a lot bigger, and therefore they could conceivably opt out of some of the people stuff to their own detriment. And I suppose that's happened by stealth, and that's a difficult thing to turn around. However, there are companies who have said, actually, do you know what? You are here to be a people leader, so we need more prominence on that one.
And that comes back to a big point about accountability, what I often hear. Because in the old days of performance management, when I was training in it, we used to say it's not about the annual appraisal, it's about the conversations in between. Yeah, but when something got dropped, what was it? The conversations in between, because they were held accountable for returning the form and the year-end review, and they didn't get a bonus if they didn't. So is there an element of what
there
we hold
is.
people to
We
account
sort of put the emphasis on the wrong place in terms of like a measure of success. You're absolutely right about that. I've seen some really good examples where companies are using technology actually as a prompt to get them to get more involved in those regular conversations. And of course now we can create a kind of dashboard view. A system can see when people are regularly having that conversation and creating some notes of actions from it as a useful tool and a reminder, and then people can look on a sort of system-wide basis and go, there's a lot of engagement in that team, there's not much going on in there, and actually use that data to catalyse and put a conversation in the mix which says what's going on here. And I think that's a healthy position to be in. So I think we can move the accountability from an episodic to a regularised thing, and I think that's good. I think when sometimes people feel they're being checked up upon, it can have a bit of an unnerving impact, but compliance happens. So we could create a good habit out of that. I think that's what I'd like to consider that as a process to do that.
One of the things I wanted to pick your brains on, this whole thing of what gets in the way. I don't know if this has been your experience. In my experience, everyone has a blooming opinion about performance management, from the board all the way, managers, employees, and everyone has their own take on it. So if you're the HR person, say, I want to deliver something new, it's a lot of pressure on you to get it right. And how do you please everyone? Have you seen that?
Yeah, well, I've experienced it. So I got involved in, a system that was moving it from Word document into some form of integrated system. And so I just converted that process to a tech platform, and it didn't work at all. I didn't consult people, they didn't own it, it was too laborious. There were too many tech checks in that. People felt really managed by the process, and so they pushed back on it. So yeah, everybody has an opinion on it. And whilst I would talk about HR having a degree of culpability in the fact that the system's a bit misfiring, I still recognise, and I've had this experience myself, that when you go to like the board or senior leaders, they're like, no, we need that, we've got to have it like this. And so they will be the architect of the system that doesn't work, but you kind of got to carry it out.
Yeah, well, someone made a point to me recently, it was a head of OD, one of our customers, who'd said, when you go to the board, they can often be a bit protective of the old ways because they've done well under it. It got them to where so it can't be that bad because it helped me. So I mean,
it is.
What's your advice to HR people in these kind of tricky situations?
So I think, there's one opportunity, which is to allow those people to go back to the floor and experience work as it is now. And I think they might see it's different, and they might see that it needs different kind of stimulus and different feedback mechanisms. So that would be one way to experience it, but that's a big ask of people to want to do that. But they should just listen to their people more. And I know one of the big banks in the UK had an exercise where they deliberately created a listening environment, and leaders felt so much more involved in what was really mattering to people. They made changes, And I guess I'd say that is the ultimate, which is we just listen to your people then.
So real voices,
Yeah.
surveys, focus groups, and actually
Yeah.
presenting the actual things they're saying. Back to
Totally.
the board.
So they'll get a survey, they'll get performance management reports, but I think underneath all that is dialogue with people that will tell you this is friction, not flow. This is not really working for me, because that might change their opinions a bit. Yes, whilst they won in the old system, if they want to keep the people they've got in the optimum positions, they might need to change their approach on what performance management does and should look like for people. So that would be one thing to do. And I guess there is a sense really that the times have changed. So there is something about trends and analysis with other market forces that people will listen to, because if they see a company doing very well based on a very regularized conversational viewpoint and they're attracting the top talent, that will breed a bit of envy and they might want to adopt some of that. So I think you've got to appeal to perhaps a bit of that too.
Yeah, and there's also increasing body of learnings of what does work
True.
now. I think when things started to change, there was always articles in HBR about what doesn't work, but not so much about what does.
True.
We've worked with a couple of hundred organisations who have done this now, so there's a huge amount of knowledge being built up amongst organisations that people can leverage.
Yeah, I think you're right, and it's gone beyond, I guess you'd say, sort of hyped up headlines into actual science, evidence, and I guess we know a lot more now about the impacts of how people behave and their attitudes and intent, and how some things can get in the way and actually stifle us from being productive or creative. And I guess those are quite useful things for people to then think, well, how do we remove those obstacles and create a more flowing system? And I think that you're right in that, building up a body of evidence, talking to a number of people creates quite a compelling cause.